Hello and welcome to the first episode of a new series from Bakul Foundation called Travels and Novels. Well, I saw Priyanka, I think, asking this question. It's not Saturday. She's confused. Well, it is not Saturday, of course. Today is Thursday. Now, the confusion is because, in the pandemic, our library, the Bakul library where I'm sitting right now in Bhubaneswar, in Satyanagar, Bhubaneswar, the Bakul library, and that is the images that you saw in the intro video and of the sessions that we have at the library, a lot of it focusing on multicultural exposure. Now, the library has been closed in this pandemic, but then we kind of reinvented ourselves with a lot of digital engagements. We started with something called Story Time at 9, in which every Saturday, we actually travel to different countries with one of the finest oral professional storytellers who tell us stories and introduce their culture to us. Now, this program, today's program, is a little different from that. This is a new series called Travels and Novels, which is not only for children, but for young adults and adults as well. But in a way, this program has emerged out of Storytime at 9. Because, we have been traveling to different countries each Saturday at 9 p.m. live on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter. And we are very lucky and very fortunate that the Ministry of External Affairs, Government of India, seem to follow our shows, and they liked it very much and reached out to us to partner. And guess what? Today is a matter of great honor for us that the Prime Ministers of India and Luxembourg are meeting on a standalone one-on-one summit for the first time in 20 years. And thanks to the initiative by the Ministry of External Affairs, the Ambassador of Luxembourg in India, and the Indian Ambassador to Belgium and Luxembourg, on the sidelines of the PM's meeting, which happened in the day, we are having a people's meeting through stories and culture at the evening, and we have had the honor of being able to host it. Thanks to the Ambassador of Luxembourg in India, he reached out to one of the finest young novelists, very impressive at her age, the kind of literature that she has been able to create. We are really impressed and happy that we have her with us. And with this, we begin this new series called Travels and Novels, which is like a cross between a Meet the Author and a Meet the Culture. So it is like, imagine, now I know that many of you are from Odisha, not all, but imagine we have a Manoj Das introducing Odisha to people from outside the state. So, I mean, it would be so rich. So that is what we imagine, that it would be wonderful to try and gain a perspective into the culture of different countries through an eminent author from that country who would take us, into give us an exposure to the culture of the country and the literary culture and how it influenced their writing. So today is the first session, and I'm very happy that we have Anna Leader. Now, she published her first poem when she was only 5. Can you believe that? Right? And she has won. She's a famous poet, playwright, and novelist, and she has won awards for all of them, global awards as well as awards from the country of Luxembourg for all of that. She's written many novels as well. Even while she was in high school, she studied comparative literature at Princeton University, and we are very happy that now she is teaching children in a school. So for those of us at Bakul, who believe in working for children, we're very happy that someone like Anna is there for our first show. And engaging her in conversation, we have another eminent author, Ms. Shubha Sarma. Her first book of stories was called Fly on the Wall, and that is how she sees herself as a writer, to be a fly on the wall, observing others. Very soon, next week, next Thursday, 26th, we are going to have a book launch that will be again broadcast live on the Bakul Foundation channel, but at 8 p.m. So do mark that in your calendar. And just one more announcement, for those who do not know, Bakul has also been running another online engagement called Bakul Talks, in which every Tuesday at 7 p.m. we talk about the Nobel Prize winners of 2020. And this Tuesday at 7 p.m. we are discussing the Nobel Prize of Literature 2020 that went to Louis Gluck, the famous poet. And we have one of the finest poets in India today, Ranjit Hoskote, who will be discussing the poetry of Louis Gluck and why it won the Nobel Prize. But more about that later. over to Mrs. Shubha Sarma and Anna Leader. Thank you very much. And please do not forget to like, subscribe, and share this video, because if you like and subscribe to our channels on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter, you get to know about all the other programs that are coming up. So that way you can be tuned in. So, and please share the video if you like it. Thank you very much. Over to you, Shubhaji, to take this discussion forward.
Thank you, Sujit. A very, very warm welcome to our viewers to this edition of Novels and Writers, and to the beautiful, talented Anna joining us from the faraway lands to tell us more about the beautiful city of Luxembourg. Anna, as Sujit said, you are an extremely accomplished young author, and you have written in almost all formats. You also grew up in the lovely country of Luxembourg, which is famous as an investment management center, is one of the wealthiest countries in Europe, and is in many ways the very heart of the European Union, which beats vibrantly, which is full of cultural influences. But it is also famous for the interesting tale of another beautiful lady called Melusina. Would you care to tell our viewers today about the story of Melusina?
Absolutely. I'm so happy and honored to be here. As Shubha said, my name is Anna Leader and I'm a writer from Luxembourg. I'm very excited to share a story from my home country with you today. This is the story of Melusina. Once upon a time, in the time of the Crusades, hundreds and hundreds of years ago, there was a king named Elinus. He was the king of Albany, which is Scotland today. Elinus went hunting one day and came across a beautiful lady in the forest. Her name was Pressine. He asked her to marry him on the spot, and she agreed, but on one condition. He must not enter the chamber where she was giving birth to their future children. He agreed. They were married, and their marriage was a happy one, at least at the start. Soon she gave birth to triplets, but when she was in the birthing chamber, Elinus could not resist the temptation to crawl onto part of the roof and look through the window of her room. Because he had broken his promise, Pressine left the kingdom with her 3 daughters, and she traveled to the lost island of Avalon. The 3 daughters, Melusina, Melior, and Palatine, grew up in Avalon without any knowledge of what their father had done. They were happy living together as a small family, but they started having more and more questions about where they came from. On the girls' 15th birthday, Melusina asked why they had been taken to Avalon. Their mother told them the full story of their father's betrayal. And when hearing this, Melusina decided to seek revenge. She and her sisters left Avalon, captured their father Elinus, and locked him into a mountain. Pressine, their mother, became enraged when she heard what they had done, and she punished them for the disrespect to their father, even though he had betrayed her before. Melusina, in particular, was condemned and cursed to take the form of a mermaid for 1 day out of every week. Melusina left Avalon and traveled to mainland Europe, where she lived alone. One day, a nobleman named Count Siegfried found her sitting on a rock above a river in the shape of a normal woman. She was singing a beautiful song, and he fell in love with her at first sight. He asked her to marry him on the spot. She agreed on 2 conditions. First, she would never leave the rock where she was sitting. And second, she would spend 1 day every week alone in her bath chamber. Siegfried agreed, and they were married. He built a castle on the hill where she had been sitting so that she would never have to leave the rock. Years passed, and she spent 1 day every week alone in her bathroom. Eventually, Siegfried became desperate to know what she was doing that day and whether she was hiding something from him. He went against her wishes and peered through the keyhole of the door into the bath chamber. He saw her lying in the bath, with a mermaid's tail. Outraged by this betrayal, she disappeared out of the window and jumped into the river below. Count Siegfried never saw her again, but the legend goes that she returns to the rock every 7 years, and you can even hear her singing. This is Luxembourg's founding myth, and there's lots of variations. And there's even a statue of Melusina by the river, which she supposedly jumped into. Thank you for listening.
That is such a beautiful story, Anna. Thank you for sharing it with us.
Of course. I would love to show a couple of photos of Luxembourg and the statue of Melusina now, if that's okay. Fantastic. Here's the statue that they've put quite recently down by the river where she jumped. The next photo is of the casemate, which is a very famous old stone structure in Luxembourg. You can see the river below, and you can see the tower there. And then we have a few photos of Luxembourg City itself, which in my opinion is the most beautiful city in the world. Here it is in the evening. You can see how there's a lower part and an upper part. Here's the river again from a different angle. And here's one last photo of the city as well. And you can see the casemate, the stone wall around the side where Melusina was able to have sat and jumped into the river from. Thank you for showing the photos.
Indeed, I think Luxembourg would qualify as perhaps the most beautiful country in the world when seen from your eyes and the way you have described it with so much of affection and love. In fact, I'm struck by the similarities in culture between India and Luxembourg because, Anna, we have a very similar story to that of the tale of Melusina. In one of our ancient epics, we have two very ancient epics in India, the Ramayana and the Mahabharata. So in the Mahabharata, King Shantanu, who is the ruler of Hastinapur, marries the river goddess Ganga. Ganga is the river Ganges, which you might be familiar with, which flows from the Himalayas right through the heart of India, through the northern plains, and then ends in the Bay of Bengal in Bangladesh and India. So King Shantanu married the goddess river Ganga, and he made a similar promise to her about not asking her any questions. And one day when he found her drowning one of their children in the river, he could not control himself and he berated her and expressed his anger. And then the river goddess Ganga, she told him that you have broken your vow to me of never questioning my actions. So I am going to leave you now and you can live your life in your kingdom. So when I thought of this epic and the story of Shantanu and Ganga and you telling us about Melusina, her father, the Count Siegfried, do you think that our ancient tales carry a very strong and rich tradition of women's rights, of equality between the two genders?
Absolutely. Actually, I'm struck by the similarities between Melusina's story and her mother's story, which suggests that there's a cycle that needs to be broken of men in the family who are not respecting the women's wishes. If you compare that to other stories like Hans Christian Andersen's The Little Mermaid, where the mermaid gives up everything in order to be with the man, or you compare it to a story like the Odyssey, where sirens are these evil women who lure men to their death, you get a very different story than the one of Melusina or the one that you just told us from India. I actually wrote a play 2 years ago called Outlast that was based on the Melusina myth. I was inspired by Melusina's bravery in her ability to, protect her privacy and create boundaries with her husband. In my play, I imagined what would have happened if Melusina had continued to rule Luxembourg for thousands of years. Of course, she's immortal. She's a mermaid. And what would happen if she kept remarrying mortal men throughout that time. So in my play, I looked a little bit more at these marriages and the issues of distrust and disrespect, and I imagined a different, more independent future for Melusina.
Thank you. You are fluent in several languages, including French and German. And as Sujit mentioned in the introduction, you have received widespread recognition also for some very famous translations that you have undertaken. Would you feel that the essence of a work is lost when it is translated?
So I love translation. I think that if something's translated very well, it complements the original text and adds to our understanding of that text rather than replacing the original or, being sidelined by the original. I don't think translation is a necessary evil. I think it's an art form in itself. I learn so much about the poems that I translate because you have to read them so deeply in order to understand them well enough to put them into a whole different language. I actually also learn a lot about my own poems when they have been translated. For example, Luxembourgish poet Florent Toniello translated one of my poems from English to French, and I heard so many more interesting nuances and resonances in his translation. So that was a really wonderful experience for me. I've also translated poems of his for the International Poetry Festival Transpoésie in Brussels. And it's a wonderful way to engage with a contemporary writer. I've also translated poems by, writers from the past. But when you translate someone from the present, you get to discuss their work with them and run ideas by them and hear feedback about what they originally intended and what you are understanding from the poem. Absolutely.
Would you like to read one of your pieces, either in poetry or from the translation, or both, if you can?
Absolutely. I have a translation, which I think would be perfect to read because it's about another mermaid myth. It's a poem by German poet Heinrich Heine, who wrote a poem about a woman who sits on a rock and brings sailors to their death. So I translated this from the original German. The Lorelei by Heinrich Heine. I do not know what it might bode that I should be so sad. A fairy tale from long ago now will not leave my head. The air is cool and darkening above the quiet Rhine. The mountain tops are sparkling in afternoon sunshine. The loveliest young maiden sits so beautifully up there. Her golden jewelry gleams and glints. She combs her golden hair. She combs it with a golden brush, and while she combs, she sings. The tune is both miraculous and overpowering. It grips the sailor in the ship with wild and aching woe. His eyes are only looking up, not at the rocks below. I believe that in the end, the waves devoured ship and boy, and that is what the Lorelei accomplished with her voice.
This is so magical. I could literally visualize the scene of the sailor sailing on the ocean and the mermaid singing and the ship being devoured by the waves. Thank you so much. Anna, you have accomplished great feats and work. Your work has been recognized in all formats. You wrote poetry as a child. In fact, Sujit mentioned your first poem was published when you were only 5. I think your first novel, which was a historical novel, was published when you were 16, at an age when most people would still be reading historical novels. You have also been admired for your work in drama, in theater, and your writings are exquisite. But which is your personal favorite format, having dabbled in all these genres?
I think poetry has always been my favorite genre. As you can tell from a very young age, I love to play around with words and rhymes. But recently, I would say that my favorite format is writing plays. My play Deliver Us was performed in October at the National Theatre of Luxembourg. It's a play about women who are giving birth during the coronavirus crisis. It was such a powerful experience to talk to women about their experiences, include that in the writing, and then to watch 2 amazing actresses and my director, Richard Twyman, bring the story to life. So theater brings my writing off the page in a way that I'd never seen before. It feels like more people are involved with the creative process, and I loved that collaboration, especially at a time like now when it's harder than ever to work with others and connect with others. Yeah, so I would say theater currently is my favorite genre to write in.
And you, do you have some more poetry that you could share with our viewers today? Because I must say, I looked at some of your writings that were available on the internet, and the simplicity and the beauty of your writing is actually very, very, very admirable. So
Thank
please,
you.
if you do have something, read it out for our audience today.
Absolutely. This is the poem that I wrote a few months ago when we were in quarantine. And the title is Quarantine Number 2. It was the second poem that I wrote when we were in quarantine. Quarantine Number 2. A fledgling smeared on concrete, like a fossil of the smallest dinosaur. Every day we walk the street, the little bird gets fatter and more gray, more difficult to see and easier to forget, and more horrific to decipher underfoot. I curse the careless bike or boot that crushed it, though you suggest that hunger might have gotten to it first and wrenched it from its nest. The next calamity was cosmetic then. A bias of mine. I always mourn the violent, the obvious distress, and not the hollowness, just as acute, from which that violence is born, the exhausted ache that greets the boot.
Perfectly sums up the mood, the way the words have been used. You know, I was just contrasting it with the poem you read out a few minutes ago about the mermaid, and the contrast you refer to the golden color in the mermaid poem, and here you're talking about all grays.
Mm-hmm.
The harshness of the words that you have used in this Quarantine 2 poem. I mean, you managed to create that atmosphere of hard, harsh, cruel reality, which we are all, I think, facing in today's times. So thank you for another gem.
Thank you.
I have another question for you. You know, I believe that an author is a product of her cultural and social milieu. In fact, if we see the poem that you just read out for us, Quarantine, you would not have written it had you not gone through this corona pandemic experience and the COVID-19 pandemic that has hit the country. But you have lived a large part of your life in the beautiful country of Luxembourg. You yourself said it is the most beautiful place in the world. How do you think that has influenced in your, how does it influence your writing? And does Luxembourg make an appearance in the plays that you write, or your prose or poetry? Also, do you concentrate on its beauty, or do you make the reader see some of the lesser known facets of this place? I know I put many questions together, but please answer as many as you can.
Absolutely. Luxembourg is a very, very diverse and multilingual place. 98% of the population speaks French, 80% speaks English, 78% speaks German, and 77% speaks Luxembourgish. That's 4 languages that are used every day. And I think that sense of growing up somewhere that was so multilingual has really fueled my love of translation and literatures from different countries. In terms of the impact on my own writing, I do sometimes write in French. I wrote a children's book in French a few years ago. I started an epic poem about Melusina in French, which I did not end up finishing yet. But that ability to switch between languages, I currently teach English and French, has been so important for my writing, but also my way of reading and listening to the way that different languages sound. Also, Luxembourg is a fantastic place to be a writer. In recent years, there's been a huge surge of English language writing. So this means that you get writers who write in more than one language. Like I mentioned, sometimes I write in French, but my favorite Luxembourgish poet, Agnès Culp, has published poetry in both German and French, and poets are able to express things in different languages. The other benefit of being a Luxembourgish writer is the government provides huge support and opportunities to writers. For example, they realized the need for an artistic response to the coronavirus pandemic. So they commissioned a series of plays in English, French, German, and Luxembourgish, including my play Deliverus. There's a sense that part of what a country's job is to provide cultural nourishment for its people, in addition to healthcare and education. And that's one of the things about Luxembourg that I'm most grateful for. Of course, nowhere is perfect. And I think some of my poetry, questions the role of our country in the larger world. You introduced us by mentioning how beautiful we are, but also in the country, but also, what industries and that wealth and beauty rests upon. That's something that comes up in my work sometimes as well. But I think the most important thing about Luxembourg, the one thing I'd love everyone to take away from this evening too, is that mix of cultures and languages and how inspiring it can be. I know that India has over 1,000 languages spoken, or a huge number of languages spoken. Luxembourg only has like a few, but they're so important to our sense of the country as a linguistic place and as a cultural and literary place as well.
Wonderful, because again, I'm struck by the similarity and how you are using it in your writing. In India, as you mentioned, we have innumerable languages. There are people who are still carrying on, people like Ganesh Devi, who are cataloging all the languages and trying to maintain a historical record of the different dialects and languages that are spoken in the country. I have a question which is related to these different heritages and ethnic groups. So, as a writer, you interpret a situation or an event from multiple perspectives. I mean, when you wrote that play, let us say on the birthing of children during the coronavirus pandemic, COVID pandemic, you would have seen it through different characters in your play that are inhabiting your writing. A writer can make an ordinary place magical just by the power of her pen, because she shows you not as it is, but as she sees it. Luxembourg has a very long and interesting history, and as you mentioned, people with 4 different linguistic heritages and maybe greater number of ethnicities. How has this influenced the literary culture of Luxembourg as a whole?
Absolutely. Yes, you're right. As I said, there's at least 4 languages that are used every day in Luxembourg. That means the street signs are written in 2 or 3 or even 4 languages. And if you walk down the street, you'll hear so many different languages being spoken. And I already told you about our founding myth, right? The country was founded through Melusina and Count Siegfried. But since then, its history has been largely shaped by its interactions with Germany, France, Belgium. We border all 3 of those countries. And yet Luxembourg retains its individual sense of identity. Our national motto is, we want to remain as we are. And that's true in a sense, because Luxembourg is very proud of its history, culture, beautiful nature, architecture. But it's also very open to modernization and the influence of different cultures. And I think part of that openness means that there's more of a writing and literary scene in Luxembourg now than ever. There are so many different readings and events across the country. My father, who's also a writer, actually did a reading event once on a bus. They have all sorts of opportunities to bring literature to the wider public. The libraries are wonderful, and they really contribute to the sense of a literary community there as well. So I think Luxembourg's history, culture, and sense of nationality really comes through in the number of cultural opportunities that are afforded to writers, but also to the general public.
It sounds so enticing to be in a country where book readings happen on buses or in such informal settings. You are really making Luxembourg an extremely attractive destination for all our viewers today. Tell me, Anna, in India, we find that there is a lot of diversity, and I believe you have visited India as a young teenager many years ago, and you have visited Calcutta or Kolkata, Sikkim, and Rajasthan. These are perhaps some of the most captivating and culturally rich places in our country. Tell us, what was your impression about your visit to India, though it is a considerable time. It's been a long time since you did visit. And did you carry back any experiences or memories that you have used in your writing at some point after that?
To India. That was in 2010. So like you said, it was a long time ago. We were there for 1 month. We started in Kolkata, which I remember as being so colorful, especially with all the marigolds. It was beautiful. And then I often think back to the incredible sight of waking up in before dawn and watching the sunrise over the Himalayas in Sikkim. That was an incredible memory. I was only 14 years old at the time, and I remember I actually started writing a novel set in India when I was there. It never got finished, unfortunately, but I did find it a very inspiring place to be. I'm a fan of several Indian writers currently. I'm actually teaching a book by Aravinda Diga in my English literature class right now. So I continue to be inspired by the incredible visual memories of India, whether it was those yellow marigolds in Calcutta or that beautiful scene of the sun rising in Sikkim.
I think you need to visit India again to complete that book.
That's true. There's so much left to see. Absolutely.
Anna, tell us a little more about your view on how the literary landscape of Luxembourg has changed over the years. Because as a writer, you are not merely writing your own thoughts, but in many ways you are recording history for posterity. And your fiction, like that of most other authors, which is set in a particular period, tells us so much about the society, the politics, the music. You write a lot of poetry related to music and the culture of the time when it is written. I will just share with you how I perceive in India it has changed. So, post independence, our literature was of a different kind. The style, the content, the use of language, the themes, the stories. And just 5 decades down the line, everything has changed. So, have you noticed something similar in Luxembourg? And what would you like to tell us about that?
I have only a limited view being so young, but there's already been so many changes in the last 10 or 15 years. I mentioned that, for example, literature in more languages is becoming more and more popular, specifically English language literature. You'll hear a lot more English literature being included in national anthologies or in events like the readings that I mentioned. The other thing that I've noticed a lot is Luxembourg is continually reckoning with its history. So World War II is an increasingly popular subject for writers. I translated a play by the wonderful playwright Nathalie Renveau about World War II and the experience of people who were navigating the situation. Obviously, Luxembourg was one of the first countries to be invaded, and that's something that we are continually thinking about. Another novel by an American-born Luxembourgish writer about World War II was awarded our literary prize this year. So there's an increasing, investigation of history and an increasing openness to variety of languages and writers from different backgrounds, which I think in a country where almost half of the country are expats or foreigners of some kind, myself included. My parents are English and American, although I have Luxembourgish citizenship and grew up there. That can only benefit our sense of, even though we want to remain as we are, remaining open as well to the world and the way that the world shapes our literary culture.
True. I would request our viewers to send in their questions also. In case you have any questions, we will put them to Anna on your behalf, and she will be more than happy to share her experiences. In the meantime, Anna, while we get some more questions from our viewers, tell me, you are teaching in a school and you seem to love your work, and you are juggling many classes and, as you said, conferences with parents, and a lot is happening. We would be having a large number of young people watching this program today. So what would you advise them if they wanted to look at writing as a profession, or do you think that it is best done as a hobby? What would you tell them today?
like you said, teaching is my vocation. It's my passion. My mother's a teacher. My father's a teacher. 3 of my 4 grandparents were teachers. I mean, it makes me so happy to be able to share literature with students. In terms of advice for young writers, I do subscribe to the most widespread advice. Write every day. Try to focus on quantity and not quality at first. The more you can produce, the more you'll have to work with in the future. There's nothing more liberating than giving yourself the chance to write badly. I also encourage young writers to read a lot and to save lines of poetry or prose that resonate with them. I have a collection of over 1,000, probably like 5,000 quotes that I have saved from my reading. They're always a great source of inspiration and comfort for me. And the other piece of advice is I always keep a little notebook, which is easily, taken around with me, where I can write down images, ideas, things that I hear people say, so I don't forget them. Those notebooks are a really good source of inspiration as well if I'm trying to look through to find an image to build a poem around. So yeah, writing a lot, writing often, reading a lot, saving lines of poetry from other writers that you admire, and then taking down notes on things that you're hearing and seeing would be my advice for young aspiring writers.
Okay, so we do have a question from Samir Das, and I would suggest that he Google it, but since he's asked it, I'll just put it to you. He has asked, what is the capital of Luxembourg?
It's also Luxembourg. Luxembourg is the capital of Luxembourg.
And the other question that he has asked, which is definitely more interesting, is what is the famous food of Luxembourg?
So we have a few famous foods. The cuisine is, for me, it's the best of both worlds because you have some French and some German, influences. So, for example, just with the bread, you can get wonderful baguettes, or you can get wonderful dark breads like German breads. For the famous food, my favorite would be Gompelkirschens, which is like fried potato cakes, like little fried potato patties. You can get them in the wintertime especially, and they are delicious.
I'm literally salivating when you're talking about the fried potato cakes. This sounds so yum. Samir Das has another question. He is asking, and this I think is very interesting from a linguistic perspective also, that does Luxembourg have any other name? As in India, we have many names for India. We have the ancient name of Bharat. We also sometimes refer to it as Hindustan, which is the land of the river Sindhu or Indus. So is there any other name for Luxembourg?
Luxembourg actually is the same in most languages. In French, it's Luxembourg. In German, it's Luxembourg. But the one thing I'll say to bring it back to the myth of Melusina is that according to one version of the myth, Count Siegfried had to borrow money from the devil to build the castle on the hill. And Lucifer and Luxembourg, there's a conspiracy theory that those two things are related, and that name for the country came from that original debt to the devil.
Sounds very, very interesting. Lucifer. I would have never made a connection between Lucifer and Luxembourg had you not told us today. There is another young lady, Subhashri Mohapatra, and she wants to know that which is your favorite genre to read. So tell us about some of your favorite authors.
Absolutely. I read widely in all genres. I love long books. I mean, my favorite novel of all time is Middlemarch by George Eliot, which has to be over 800 pages long. But recently, I'm busy as a teacher. I don't have time to read really long books. I love to read plays. And reading plays is almost as good as watching TV, in my opinion, because it's dialogue, it's fast-paced. They're only 60 to 100 pages. You can read them in an hour or two, and then you can watch the story play out in your head. So I've been really enjoying reading plays throughout quarantine, and then watching them as well, because now there's so many incredible opportunities to watch them online. And then, of course, it was inspirational and helpful for when I was writing my own play. So I've been reading a lot of theater recently.
Have you read any of the Indian plays that we have one of the greatest playwrights, Kalidas. He wrote plays in Sanskrit, and some of his plays have really sustained over the centuries, I should say. So have you had an opportunity to read the works of any of the Indians?
No plays written in Indian. I've been reading plays almost entirely in English or French. But that sounds like a fantastic one to look up. You'll have to email me the information afterwards.
Yeah, and that is where I think translations are so relevant, though a lot of purists don't like them and they find them to be taking away from the original. But I believe that if there were no translations, we would have not read half of the literature that is available to us today. India has Rabindranath Tagore, and India has Munshi Premchand, and we have Kalidas, and we have so many other beautiful writers.
It's so important to keep translating, and translations aren't static. A lot of writers translated, for example, the Odyssey in the 1600s, and it sounds like it was written in the 1600s, but if a work is a classic, it should be translated every 50 years to keep fresh in the minds of the people reading it. There's always more you can take out of a classic work of literature. Everything should be not translated once, it should be translated 10 times so that we get a full sense of all the possible meanings you can pull out of it. Translation is important and it's never finished. You can always keep translating works that have already been translated.
I think it brings us back to that point where it's all about perspective. You might look at something in a particular way and interpret it in a particular way, and I might have an entirely different and refreshing take on it, and somebody else after a decade or 2 decades would have an entirely different thought about it because of the way in which our minds work and maybe the society around us and the environment in which we are there.
Absolutely.
So we do have a Facebook user who I think is very keen on pursuing literature in Luxembourg. Your talking about the patronage from the government has excited him considerably, and he wants to know if there is any scholarship program that is available for a master's degree in literature or in any literary activity that is in Luxembourg. Would you be able to tell us something about that?
That's a great question. The university in Luxembourg is called the University of Luxembourg. It's the only university. So I encourage you to go onto their website and take a look at what opportunities that they have available for studies in literature or creative writing.
Okay, so this was the question. This was the answer for you, Mr. Kumar. And we have another question. In fact, the number of comments that are flowing in are very, very encouraging. The session seems to have a huge turnout. So, Anna, I must say you have pulled in a lot of people to come late at 9 p.m. in India when people are generally, glued to their television sets. We have a very popular program running at 9 p.m. every day, an Indian version of Who Wants to Become a Millionaire or something like that. It's called Kaun Banega Crorepati. So for a change, people have left that and they're here to listen to you. So we have Nagarjun Vadekar here, and he is asking you that Luxembourg was one of the first countries to be affected by war. And how does the country remember that period through its literature and arts?
Such an interesting question. I have spent some time studying Anise Kultz, who I mentioned is my favorite Luxembourg writer. She lived through the wartime and the German occupation of Luxembourg. She originally wrote in German because that was the language of her schooling, but then she switched and she wrote entirely from French afterwards. I think that in your life, like in her lifetime, you can see an example of how the memories of the wartime has changed her entire course of writing. She wrote in German originally, and now she writes exclusively in French. She's an incredibly well-known poet. She actually won the Prix Goncourt, I believe, in 2018, and entirely writes in French now. And like I mentioned, I translated a play about the history of the Second World War. I think a question that's been on Luxembourg's mind recently is the question of collaboration and to what extent Luxembourg will take responsibility for things that may have happened during the Second World War. That's a question that has been coming up in some literature too. But I find it fascinating how the war influenced the literary landscape of Luxembourg, simply in terms of what language people chose to write and speak in. A lot of the issues that were faced by poets across Europe, for example, Paul Celan, who wrote in German and tried to remake the language somehow after the horrors of the Second World War. You're seeing that issue faced by a lot of poets in Luxembourg too, who have more languages available to them. For example, Anise Kultz spoke French, German, and Luxembourgish. It's a fascinating topic. Thank you for the question.
Sujit, do we take any more questions, or you think it's?
No, I think because Anna has to. So I would like to tell our viewers that Anna actually has a class in exactly 2 minutes from now in another building. But this conversation will continue. I mean, you have already interacted. You've already engaged with Shubhaji, and Shubhaji and I will be there for the next 5 minutes or so for any other questions that you would like to particularly ask Shubhaji. But thank you very much, Anna. It was wonderful having you, and and it's really inspiring also that you are such an accomplished writer, and you studied comparative literature, but you chose to work as a school teacher because that is something that Shubhaji, I'm sure you'll agree, is not very similar between Luxembourg or people there and India. That for us, primary school or school teachers are the least important. So someone like you, would want to be a university professor or a professional writer. But thank you very much for joining us, and we hope to be in touch. And as Shubhaji said, we hope that you will come back to India and you will finish your novel or write a new novel.
I hope so too. Thank you so much for having me today, and thank you everyone.
And you should, as I said, you should meet Shubhaji, because I didn't give the other side of her introduction. She is a senior person in the government here, and she is the secretary of the Handlooms, Handicrafts and Textiles Department in Odisha, state of Odisha. I don't know how much of the beautiful sari that you could see from the little picture. And she was also in the Department of Culture, in the Ministry of Culture in the Government of India. So she's someone, so you must have guessed that from the questions that were coming. But these are also pointers for our audience if they would like to ask questions to her. But thank you very much once again.
Thank you so much, and thank you, Shubha and Sujit and everybody for watching tonight. I'm going to go teach now. Goodbye.
Bye. And as I said earlier, before, as you type in your questions, next Thursday, we have the book launch of Shubhaji's new novel. We can just look at the cover right now, The Avasthis of Amnagiri, which is just out. And next Thursday, which is the 26th of November at 6 p.m., sorry, at 8 p.m., right at 8, we will have the live book launch on this platform, on the Buckle Foundation handles on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter. So do join in next Thursday at 8 p.m. And as I said earlier also, on Tuesday at 7 p.m., we have the Buckle Talks, where we are talking about the Nobel Prize in Literature. And we have the wonderful poet Ranjit Hoskote, who will be talking about the Nobel Laureate in Literature for 2020, Louis Gluck. So there are questions, Shubhaji, for you now. Okay. How to improve my English speaking skill? Okay.
So I can see that this young lady is in class 5. So, and I hope that one of her parents is with her when she's typing this out. Patnaik ji, my suggestion would be that you ask her to read. Read, and read. There are mechanical ways of learning the English language like any other language. And you could pick up the Renan Martin, the Red Book, which is the Bible for all school kids. And you could learn it from the first page to the last page. And you might still not be able to speak English the way you would want to. But if you read, you enjoy the process and you pick up the language in a far, far easier manner. The other thing I would advise is that she could listen to people speaking, people like Anna Leader, people who have a good command over the language, because when you hear others speak, and especially when you're very young, she must be hardly maybe 9 or 10, you unconsciously pick up the way they pronounce their words. With this kind of work, I think she should not have, she shouldn't face too much problem in picking up the language. I hope that helps.
Okay, so there is a question here about the address of the Bakul Library. This is in Satyanagar, Bhubaneswar. If you go to Google Maps, you'll find it. 16 Satyanagar in Bhubaneswar. There are other libraries, but the main library where I'm sitting. And just to let you know, this is not a painting. This is actual bookshelf. That's because Anna asked me that question. So I just thought I'll show you this. But
and I must add, Sujit, I must add, the gentleman who's asking the address of Bakul Library and the person before this, many years ago, Bakul was the only place in Bhubaneswar where you could go looking for books and find some of the finest collections. And I think if anybody enjoys reading, they should have visited Bakul, and if they have not, they have missed something. So they must make a beeline to Bakul, enjoy the ambience. I think Sujit has very painstakingly built up the library book by book, page by page, periodical by periodical. So if you don't know, please Google and look for Bakul on Google Maps and land up there and enjoy the place. It's a beautiful place for book lovers.
Thank you so much for all the kind words. But just to let you know, we are as good as the people with us, because this is a completely volunteer-driven initiative. So every book in the library is donated. So all the beautiful thing is just that I work with wonderful people like Shubhaji. So that is my pleasure. And I'm very happy that she chose the Bakul Library for her book launch. You know, she could have had anywhere. So there's a question here for you, Shubhaji. Subhashri remembers you from Koraput. So you can read the question. Are your writings influenced from the beauty of nature?
Subhashri, if you are from Koraput, then you are already my friend. It is one of the most beautiful places. It is one of the most beautiful places in Odisha, and I think both of us are fortunate that we have seen it. And Sujit also, if he has seen it, then I'm sure that you can join our friendship club, the Koraput Club. So you know, I have always admired nature, because it is something which cannot be replicated. You can make a bookshelf like Sujit's, you can put photographs like those behind me, but you cannot create the beauty of nature no matter how hard you try. And that is something which draws me, because something which is beyond your capacity to replicate or to create is something that attracts me immensely. In my writing, I don't consciously write about nature. I mean, I have not. I have written anything on which is very nature centric or environment centric. But if you see the cover of this book, you will find that there is a mango tree in the front, on the front cover, and there is this lovely parijat, or Ganga Suyari tree that you call it. Yeah, if you show the cover again, I don't know if you have the back cover here, Sujit, but the front one has a lovely mango tree, and you can see those ripe, luscious mangoes. Yes, and at the back you have the mango tree, and you also have the parijat tree and the parijat flowers. And in my entire book, at the back, you have a backdrop, like I have these photographs and Sujit has that bookshelf. So in the backdrop of my story, the mango tree and the parijat trees are constants. The characters come and go, and these are constants. So in some way, nature does creep into my writing.
Okay. I think there are so many questions I would like to ask you also, but I think we'll reserve that for next Thursday. But just before we end the session, Shubhaji, you had a fascinating conversation with Anna. What struck you as most interesting that emerged from the conversation with her? What immediately comes to, powerfully has stayed with you from that?
Two things. One is what you said, that unfortunately, we no longer value our teachers. And when you were speaking to her and making this point to her, in my mind, I was remembering that there was a time in India, in ancient India, when the teacher, the guru, Kabir has said this, that Guru Gobind do khade kake lagu paye. That means God and Guru are both there. Whom should I bow down to first? And then he says that I will bow down to my Guru first, because had my Guru not told me about God, I would not have recognized God even if I had seen him. Now, unfortunately, that tradition somewhere down the line has disappeared. And I would hold parents responsible to a large extent, parents like you and me. Because, when children come back from school and they make fun of their teachers or they are disrespectful to them, at times we let it pass, or in worst cases, we join them. I think this culture of disrespect to a teacher has to end and has to change somewhere. And somehow it has become so ingrained in our social system that today nobody wants to be a teacher. As you said, people want to be university professors, or they want to become professional writers, or maybe a journalist, a news anchor. But nobody would want to be a primary school teacher, not somebody who has a degree from Princeton, not somebody who has won every award on earth. This young lady has awards in poetry, in prose, in drama, in translation, you name it, and she has the highest awards internationally. And yet she chooses to be a teacher. That is humility, the rootedness. Somebody of her stature running and trying to, accommodate classes. She had a class in the morning, she has a class now, in between she come and does the session with no airs, no pretense. I think that is something that at the end of the day, we are all going to turn into dust. And, again, another doha, Mati kahe Kumar ko, tu mote ka ronde. What are you taking pride in? One day you're going to turn into the soil again. So I felt these two things very, very strongly.
And I think I'm so happy that we had you engaging her in conversation, because we talked about the rich culture of multilingualism. And it's so wonderful to have a multilingual Shubha Sarma, who can rattle off dohas and at the same time, who writes in English. And I'm sure for the viewers, this was a wonderful trailer of the show that is going to come next Thursday, right at 8 p.m. So do tune in. Do not forget to join that day. And as I said, you might be a little confused about, Tuesday 7 p.m. Today was 9 p.m. Next Thursday at 8 p.m. But if you like, subscribe and follow the Buckle Foundation channels on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, you will keep getting all the updates. So please do that, and please share this video if you loved it, and leave a comment. I'm sure Anna will go through all the comments. Shubha has already seen many of them, and will see the rest as well. So thank you very much, everyone. Have a great night.
Thank you, Sujit.
Thank you.
In education, that we are trying to promote reading. As statistics say, if 50% children in grade 5 cannot read the textbook of grade 2, then what is really happening? That's because the basic skills of reading and writing is not there. So we thought that if we have to change this cynicism, then we need to demonstrate what is possible with small contributions. So that is the idea basically that Buckle is trying to demonstrate, what is possible entirely with volunteerism, entirely with small little contributions. We asked people to contribute books to set up a public library in Bhubaneswar, and a children's library was set up in Bhubaneswar, and now that children's library has become a general library, a public library with more than 20,000 books. So that is one of the major things. Another major area of intervention is environment. A lot of environmental education, but through films and through creative methods. So we have a traveling film festival on environment. We go to schools, colleges, apartments and screen films on environment, primarily on climate change and on issues of water and sanitation, two issues that we're working in. And at the libraries also, we conduct a lot of workshops on creativity. We all want the world to be a better place, and we have our own ideas of how it can be better. The thing is, can we all start in some small way towards addressing that? Can we say that in some small way, this world is the way I want it to be because I have done something about it?